I was
Hey, Terry. How are you doing today? I'm doing good. Doing well. Um, as we start to pregame turkey activities, I don't know about everybody else, but I know for at least the next 6 weeks, Terry and I will be deeply engaged in pre-show discussion about various family opportunities and
meat,
events that involve
meat,
us putting our skills to the test and seeing if
meat.
we can successfully pull off another meal victory. Um,
I
Quick
mean,
question, Terry. How goes the Thanksgiving restoration project? I noticed a slight drop off in
I took a couple of days off, but we have a new question today.
questions. All right.
Yeah, because the last couple of days, I mean, part of the restoration project has been that we have a huge Thanksgiving meal coming up Sunday afternoon for everybody in our congregation. So I've been in the planning phase, and I'm just going to tell you, it's overwhelming to come up and make up a sign up list for 100 people for a Thanksgiving meal. It's just it's a lot. That's been a lot. So, but we're back on board today, and the question is, if you've not seen it, do you carve your turkey at the table, or do you carve it and serve it already sliced at the table? Because in the movies, there's always this beautiful bird sitting on the table, and I'm just going to tell you that proves to you, from my standpoint, they've never tried to carve a turkey because it is not a clean process, Phil.
Yeah. No. We carve at the island in the kitchen.
Yep,
I use a butcher's knife. I don't use anymore for years we used one of those mechanical sawing type carving knives. I
electric
don't use
knives.
that.
Yeah.
I use a butcher's knife. And I go to town, catch the bone on the edge of the bone, work down on the big breasts, hand pull the legs off and twist them, twist, snap, cut,
Mm-hmm.
and then carve out the rest.
I use the mechanical knife most of the time just because it does allow you to slice the breast pretty nicely.
Mhm.
But it leaves those weird grooves in there that I don't like. So that's when I switch up.
Yeah,
Because though this year on this Sunday afternoon, I think we could be having to cut up 5 different birds while we're there. That's
you
the
got to get some
plan.
extra skill team.
We're gonna probably use a mechanical knife at that point because your arm's
Yeah.
gonna get tired before it's over.
Well, you got to get that. Sharp knife is a safe knife. You got to make sure that thing is
Yep.
as sharp as you can safely
Okay,
create
so
it.
here's another question. Do you what for your knife sharpener? Do you have one of those the little V-shaped bar things you just run your knife through? Do you get the whetstone out and go to town?
No, actually, I have a sanding system that I picked up a few years back, and so you can change the grit on it. I use it for like all the stuff outside because you can use it for your tools outside, but
Of
I can
course
also
you
use it.
do. Of course you have some obscure system that you researched and you invested in that nobody else could possibly
Got to make sure
get.
this. It's
I
just
mean,
like the same way they make knives. It's the
I
way
have
that
a bunch
they.
of I have all the different whetstones and I can make a
Yeah, my
knife look pretty sharp.
brother-in-law's. One of them in particular really uses the whetstone for a lot of his stuff, and there's a time when that's perfect.
Yep.
But for what I'm doing with them and the time that I have, this is what works well.
I'm gonna have to
Um,
now look for this
I'll show it to you later.
ridiculous knife sanding system to see if you're a bad influence on me. I end up doing things that my wife's like, "Where did you get this idea, Phil Martin?"
Yeah,
It's Phil
books.
Martin. She's gonna. It's
Books.
so funny. Your wife just. I think Jill hates me, but I'm pretty sure Duane does hate you. You're expensive. You're an expensive friend.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. You're
This is all
you're
baffling.
pricey. Yeah.
Um, well, maybe.
Yeah. Good
I
morning,
am
Chris
food.
Emerson. I am thankful that your Astros won, although I still think they're a bunch of cheaters. And good morning to you too, Paul Hammonds.
Yeah, wasn't there a Texas team that Terry wanted to win last weekend?
Did not happen.
I know.
The
I've
wrong
heard rumors.
Texas team won Saturday, by the way.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. By the way, also, let's just say, Chris, Paul, we're looking forward to your response to today's show because we want to hear your answers.
Yeah, and Terry and I have been talking about a number of subjects over the course of what is it, 4.5, 5 years now, something like that, 7 years, some mysterious number.
It's been about
Um,
4 years because I've been here 4.5 years, 5 years in May. So that's going to be
yeah,
roughly.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
It just
at
feels like
diff-
7 years.
yeah, yeah. At different times, we've discussed some of the deep challenges that exist in involved in the work of preaching. we've done that in writing. I kind of got a note a while back of a series of posts that Terry and I kind of bounced back and forth about regarding the difficulty of preaching right around the time he moved to Alabama. And thought it'd be good to turn the table a little bit and have an interactive discussion. And this is where we would love some remarks from those who are listening in to talk about some of the blessings or positive parts of preaching. Like why, like, what do you love about preaching? And why is it that preaching is essential to whom you've decided to grow into? There's a mixture of attributes that come into play when we think about like why does a person do what they do. um, I think I remember in high school they do those aptitude tests. I don't know if Terry, did they do that with you guys with the counselors trying to figure out what you might be good at?
Yeah.
um,
I don't
and
remember the results. That's been a long time ago.
I think I've actually got the aptitude test and counseling test from my childhood as to like what was then good at and interested in, because it's one of the few pieces of paper that has somehow survived since then.
What were you supposed to do?
It's interesting. This test didn't really tell you what you were supposed to do. It gauged your categories of skill, like what you were good at on these various tests, and then it related it to some things you thought you might want to do. And at the time, I was heavily interested in architecture and becoming an architect and drawing up designs for stuff. And so it kind of listed out, hey, yeah, you've got the requisite skills to do this, and went and visited a friend who was in the School of Architecture at San Jose State and talked to him about his internship and a bunch of that stuff together. But it was just interesting. The other option for me at the time was music education, which was the other thing that was interesting. And I actually did that right out of high school and very quickly got burnt out on parts of that. So anyway, thinking about this is super important, in part because if we've already acknowledged and identified that there is aspects of preaching that are incredibly difficult to process and work through, there has to be a high level of appreciation for some of the compartments that preaching fits into in order for there to be a sense of value for the pouring out process that takes place. As an example, I know guys who started to preach simply because they loved studying the Bible. And I understand some of the rationale behind that, but that's not really the direction I'm going, because I think a lot of people love studying the Bible. A lot of people really love studying the Bible. Secondly, I think some people love preaching because they love the energy of being in front of an audience concerned with spiritual things. Now, that's different than being the person talking. But there's a certain spiritual atmosphere that takes place in worship, and there's a certain energy that exists in there, because any preacher I know, after they're done preaching, they're incredibly drained because they're pouring into that experience. And I think that's a valuable thing to consider as well. But that's not exactly what it does for me either. That's not my big thing. And thirdly, in this same thing, I think some people enjoy preaching for a lot of the wrong reasons. We might talk about that at the end or in the middle, depending on how we go. But for me, kind of getting to my like what do I love about preaching? I love seeing people's lives change. Preaching for me is a component of I need to do it, like a draw within myself, a component of I believe it's an obligation to a certain degree that is kind of laid on the shoulders of those who have the capacity and ability to do the work. But I absolutely love seeing someone's life change because they made contact with the word in some way. I think that's just fascinating to me, enjoyable, rewarding, and enriching. What about you, Terry?
Well, let me first say that why this is important is because I think we're so negative about preaching sometimes and forget the blessings and the benefits and why we do it, that we actually discourage people in the process of talking about preaching from pursuing this as their life. And if we're not careful, one day the pulpits are all going to be empty. And that doesn't mean that the church couldn't survive and that members wouldn't step up. And that doesn't mean that maybe there aren't some benefits to that, but I think that there are benefits to what we do as well. Um, and I think it's important that we encourage people. And one of the ways you encourage people is by reminding them why it's good. There is an obligatory part of this for me that I think is kind of like with you. There's a Jeremiah 20 part of this that at this point, especially at this point, Phil, I think the problem is because, at the transition from Memphis to Alabama, this, and I think I've talked about this before. I mean, there was a real consideration of doing something else. I had offers to do other things. But there's just a Jeremiah 20 aspect that had I done that, I know of a person who worked with me for a summer who took some time off and has just recently returned back to the pulpit. And I know part of that is because Jeremiah 20 ate away at him. That concept of, hey, there's a fire in me. And by the way, I don't mean by that for me personally, that means the Jeremiah 20 concept is not that I have to go now as a member and sit and to listen to what I call bad preaching, and that makes me mad, so I need to get back in the pulpit to stop bad preaching. That's not what Jeremiah 20 is talking about. Because the reality is, for me, Phil, and I don't know about you, but for me personally, when I started preaching and I listened to the content differently than the presentation, what people often define as bad preaching, I often find redeeming parts to because I listen to it differently than they do. Now, there's times I've heard bad preaching, okay, but I think we still listed it. So I just want to make that point. Jeremiah 20. There's also for me a parable of the talents kind of application here, and I think that's kind of one of the things that you didn't mention that directly, but indirectly in a sense that, I mean, at this point in my life, not only is there a burning desire within me to do this work, but I also realize that I have a talent to share the gospel in a way that is effective. And I'm not always effective, but generally effective. And at this point in my life, I would sure hate to face the Lord on the judgment day having stopped doing this. So those are the obligatory reasons for me, right? There's some things that I do that's out of obligation. But man, the real reason I preach is because I just love people. And a big part of that's what you said. I love people, and I love people in that I get to watch them grow and change and learn. And I really love young people. The highlight of my work right now might be Friday mornings at 7:00. Well, about 6:45. We have this thing we call Breakfast Club, and it's and the kids are invited, but it's generally it's about 2 or 3 families that their kids come over there, and we eat at a gas station, a little counter service place in the gas station called Sneaky Pete's. But we eat at Sneaky Pete's every Friday morning and hang out and watching those kids. And the reason that's important, by the way, is I'm a firm believer that relationships are a big part of what we do in the church. Those relationships I build with those kids on Friday morning also allows me to help those kids grow and to watch them grow. And that's the most amazing thing for me is to watch these young people build their faith and to stay faithful. So it's just people, man. It's people that had a conversation with a guy this morning, was going through something yesterday. We prayed. He was worried about it. Went great. We talked this morning about answered prayers and faith. And he's a guy we've had conversations where he struggled with that. It's just, and to feel like you've had some kind of positive impact on somebody's life, that maybe some prayer you've offered with them or some lesson you've tried to sit down with them to learn from Scripture, you see that marriages that 5 years later that Duane and I have worked with and look back and they're stronger. I mean, that's the personal reward, and the people, and feel like, this too, we don't travel around as some people like Emerson, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but Emerson does a lot more meetings than either you or I. But
yeah, I think that's a difficult, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's an aspect of preaching, this gospel meeting work that's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, but I will say that
you used to do a bunch more, and you're not doing as much right now.
Yeah.
So,
but for me, when I do get to do that and connect with other people, that's not a reason to do this, but it is a blessing and benefit. I mean, I'm grateful for that. I've met a lot of great people just because I was asked to go speak somewhere. And I know you have too. I mean, you've preached. I've preached pretty much in the Southeast and done a few meetings outside of that, but you've literally covered the country in your time. I mean, from
Yeah,
Oregon
and
to
and overseas some too, and
yeah,
um, and for me also a component of this is the way in which teaching impacts from the pulpit or in the classroom or on
yeah,
the kitchen counter. Um, you know, um, During the years that our family was in Cookville, I think there was 52 college students who came into that community and then moved into new areas. And of those 51, 52 college kids, we're continuing to connect to nearly all of them. And 45 of them are involved in local churches in some way. And the other six, I just don't know exactly precisely what's going on in their lives. There's still some level of interaction on our part, so I can't 100%, you know, clarify that. And that's not just due to the work that Jill and I have done, but that's the congregation's work. And so,
yeah,
um, and that's a side note, like as much as I am an advocate for a particular university, a school in Florida, which offers great spiritual opportunities, this is in a
yeah.
place where any college town, USA, can accomplish the same kind of good in the lives of kids who maybe don't have the opportunity or the fit to go to a different place like that.
It's a very
Not every
kingdom work view is what you're talking about.
absolutely, because those kids don't stay in that town.
And I'll say this that should be your approach with any church, because I mean I've not preached. I mean, in East Shelby in Memphis, Memphis is a commuter school, so you don't get a lot of kids that go to school there and come to work with you. But it's a transient town, so what you do get in Memphis is you get a
Mhm.
lot of young couples that come in for 5 years and then leave. And I hate to say it's rewarding. I think that makes it seem like it's a pride thing. It's really not, but it is. This is what you're talking about too. To see those people that would move on, and to see them not only just go to church but get involved. And then I'm sure you've had this experience where they call you and go, "Hey, I remember this class we studied, and they're taking suggestions, and I want to know that material," or "I remember we talked about this," or "I remember you did this mentoring program," or whatever it may be. How do we do that? And like you see the kingdom view as what you do has kind of spread out to other places because of the impact that's been had. And it's not directly connected to me, but it's a rewarding thing to see that, Phil, to make you
Yeah.
think like your works has some value to it.
That's just really an important kind of way to understand that the work of preaching is kingdom work, and as much as we sometimes narrow it down to the congregational nuts and bolts. Um,
Yeah,
like right now, if I were talking to an individual young preacher, I might get mired into like, hey, what's your preaching next year? Have you planned out some of your lessons? What's your Bible classes look like? Have you set up time to meet with your elders? To talk about next year's work. Are you balancing family in a way that's healthy to your kingdom work?
yeah.
Um, you know, put
The
all that aside.
logistics of the work. The logistics
Yeah.
of the work. Yeah.
Um, you
Do
know,
you use Logos? That would be like the third question Phil asked.
no, it would be. That's not how you phrase it. How has your use of Logos improved since our last conversation? Uh,
What's your library
uh,
look like?
yeah. Send me the printout. You know, we'll lay it against the template and tell you where you're lacking.
Yeah.
No, I think
I've already been told this morning I'm very middle of the road. Thank you very much. So
hey, so is the entire Midwest. So it's very mid.
let's get to a couple of comments. Paul Hammond said, I had someone tell me if I didn't start doing this part-time, it would cost me my soul. It's kind of similar to the, and I've used this before and I've stopped using it. If you can do anything else but preach, do it. And I think that was a good intentions, but I think we need to get back to being like, no, we really need people that can preach that could probably make a lot more money doing other things. We
Yeah.
need those guys. I mean, there's a lot of guys. I mean, there's a case where I know, and the guy does a lot of kingdom work. He's in his 20s, and he does that because he has a good income, a very good income. But I tried to tell him years ago, I know you can make way more money in this, but man, the kingdom needs you. Like the kingdom needs you in this position. And I think we need to reframe our propaganda in that sense. Anyway, and that kind of ties to Jay Taylor's burning yes.
Yeah.
It needs to be a burning yes. Yeah.
And I know a couple of guys who were jokingly told early or later in their lives that folks around them said there's going to be two outcomes for that guy, either the pulpit or prison. And I think to a certain degree, there's both some value to that, but there's also some danger in some of these ways in which we approach the idea of preaching, because it could easily become, and this is a concern that I have, too much a job. Yeah, you can preach in prison. And we lose the calling, vocation, suitable match side of it. Where someone looks at somebody and goes, oh yeah, that makes sense, because I can see that in the whole nature of who you are. I can see that level of care, that level of compassion, that level of zeal, because not everyone needs to preach in the sense of a supported context. And I'll add, like, local churches in some cases may be better off if not everybody who's part of that local church takes up the role of preaching, because there are other jobs that are equally super important communally that need to be taken up too. That's why you have in Acts chapter 6 this whole division of labor take place, even though some of them at
Still
times are also preaching intermittently.
Let's get to Emerson real quick. Love the excitement of seeing how the text relates to lives, mind first, in practical, real, surprising ways. Happens in private study. Love sharing that publicly, helping others experience the same eye-opening and hopeful experiences centered in Jesus and living in very tangible ways. I mean, it sums up a really good angle of that, like you and I said, and that starts with you, in your own personal study, and then expands to people that you work with. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, there's a level of necessary self-reflection that has the sermon hitting your heart first before it hits anyone else's. And that level of genuineness, if not carried over into the sermon, you're missing out. Like, you can be a great presenter, great educator, great communicator, but if you don't have a genuine shift internally because the message mattered to you, it's noticeable. Like, it's something that eventually, like, hey, what's going on internally for yourself. And I'm not even talking about noticeable to the audience. I think you can notice on the inside when you're not carrying that level of individual, accountability into the pulpit with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We got 8 minutes, man. Should we transition to the bad reasons?
Oh yeah, let's go.
Good reasons. The bad reasons.
We only get 8 minutes for them, so we should condense it.
Yeah, the first bad reason I'll give up is like, well, I couldn't do anything else, so I decided to preach. That's a bad reason. Like,
yeah,
and I've heard that said before. By the way, it's a bad reason.
There is a fable that exists among some places, that there are people who are preaching because they failed at everything else, and people just took pity on them. I'm not exactly sure how true that is, because there are aspects of preaching that will grind that theoretical failed individual into dust, and they will never preach again. So I kind of rethink it this way, and I think there's a high level of judgmentalism amongst those who do not understand the difficult task of preaching, that then will make this statement, well, he just couldn't really do anything else, so he's going to try preaching now.
Those who can do, those who can't teach, right? It's an extension of that. in a way.
Also untrue.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's not an equivalent by any means. Second aspect, I think, for some people who move into preaching, I think they really do love the attention of the idea of being the preacher. Um, they want to establish themselves as a name amongst their brethren and make a name for themselves. They dream of the idea of being well known as such and such.
It
I
can
will say
fuel the
eventually
ego.
that eventually sorts itself out too.
Well, that'll chew you up and spit you out eventually. If you're after it for your own self,
Yeah.
you may get by with that for a while, but eventually that's going to create some consequences you're just not prepared for. I mean, honestly. And look, I think that's a challenge. Sometimes some of us, I will tell you, there's times in my life I think that was a motivating factor it should not have been. And that's something that you have to kind of grow out of.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, and that level of ambition is part of humanity and the world that is certainly going to impact individuals in some way, either self-reflection or becomes an improper motivator. And so I think those are some aspects of that, that are really important. And that's exactly what I'm kind of talking about, Paul. The idea that we sometimes unnaturally idolize both the preacher and the role of a preacher in a way that creates these problems. Um, you know, I'll also probably add this. I think the radical adjustment in modern communication has damaged this as well because you can turn on and find great preaching every day, and
Yeah.
if your preacher doesn't match your idolized view of that preacher, you devalue the good work that is done by any well kind of hearted man in local work that can't be done by a guy 300 miles away. Like it just can't.
Yeah.
They're not able to do those things.
Here's another reason, and I don't think people really think about this, but it's kind of joked about. If you're not careful, you can think that this is somewhat of an easy job because it looks like on the surface you're just showing up for work 3 or 4 hours a week. Um, and I just want to put this out there that it's just not true.
Yeah.
You can't do this job well. It's not even a job. I always struggle with whether to call it a job or it's more of a lifestyle. But you cannot do this work well without a lot of sweat and hard work.
Yeah. This is something that Jared Saltz and Dwayne Moyer and I talk about quite a bit. There's only a certain amount of time to prepare for a set number of speaking opportunities each week. And so you can then modulate your investment. And right now, I try to make sure that when it comes to content, what I'm actually saying, I'm hitting what I consider A minus, A plus with my classes and my sermons every time.
We get a report card check in every Sunday from Phil now. That's a group thing. Where's your report card, kids?
But I know that in doing that, I'm having to accept that my delivery is probably going to be somewhere between the B minus to B plus, because I would have to take a lot more time to turn that B minus to B plus delivery into an A minus to A plus delivery. And there are times, like if I'm going to go do a meeting, absolutely. I'm going to do it a little differently. If I'm going to speak at a special event, I'm going to be in Chattanooga tomorrow night, I'm investing more time into making sure the delivery, not just the content, not just the manuscript, but the prepared wording of things matches that expectation. So I want that to be A plus, A plus. And so it takes a lot of time. And so those guys who are great communicators, effective, in those settings, I recognize right away a lot of guys in their meetings back in the 80s, they preached the same sermons everywhere in the U.S. So by the time they were preaching their 10th meeting that year, that's their 10th time through that particular sermon. It better be great. And it usually was. It usually was very well delivered. That's by reason of practice.
Yeah, I'll say that this is, to address that, the time spent and stuff. I probably still spend a little bit more time crafting every word in presentation side than a lot of guys do. But this isn't really our assigned topic, but I think one of the things to point out is if you know that the person that presentation side of it is struggling, then you need to go get in Toastmasters or something and work on that. I mean, just because that's a part of your work too, right? But that gets back to what I was talking about. That takes time, Phil.
Yeah.
And for somebody like you who's been going to school, and that's your personal choice, but that requires a lot of time. Then you have kids, and then you're shepherding a church, which takes a lot of time. But your sermons take a lot of time too. I mean, if you're going to do this work, you're going to have to work a lot, and you're going to sacrifice some things in the process of that. That's probably, I think it's hard to explain to guys that have never done it. I think that's the important side of that.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know, the first time I heard it was directly from D or from a third-party source, and then I heard it from D later, that the danger of preaching is that it can become the lazy man's paradise. And I really think that particular terminology is super important. And seasonally, I know that preachers across the U.S. have gone through seasons where that temptation to turn it into the lazy man's paradise is stronger than others. All the competent preachers I know do not keep a 40-hour work week. If that's what you think, and actually most people I know who are successful in their own endeavors don't also keep a 40-hour work week.
I was going to say, a 40-hour work week is kind of antiquated at this point. I mean, it's just not even real.
It doesn't mean you sacrifice your family. It just means that there are some things that you learn to prioritize in different ways, and that you've got to learn to incorporate your family into your life when you're a minister in ways that might be different than those who don't serve the kingdom in the way that ministers do.
It's also the reason, I personally don't get to do things I used to do, like hunt. Like I gave up hunting 15 years ago because I just don't have the time with my family and the work and everything else. There's no time to dedicate to that. Yeah. And the times I don't play golf like I used to. When I was in college, I played golf a lot. When I've played golf over the last 15 years, it's because I'm playing with somebody from church. That's the only reason I've ever played golf.
And how many times was that with Andy Bethay?
A heavy amount of times, but that was because we had a golfing retreat in Memphis that Andy would go to, and one of the few times in the last 15 years, honestly, that I played golf without being at that golfing retreat was at a gospel meeting in Noonan, Georgia, at Andy Bethay's house because he lived on a golf course. Yeah. So, I mean, you just, and people are like, well, you don't do this. No, I don't. Outside of family and preaching, my only hobby is probably watching Tennessee football and smoking meats. And most of those times I'm incorporating people from church into that. So it's, it's interesting how that works.
Hey, I want to say a couple things. Number one, we really appreciate everyone who's joined in the conversation today. Good to see and hear from you guys. Charlene, it's good to see you pop in and listen to the broadcast. Charlene listened to a lot of our teaching when we were doing it daily over the year and a half or so, from 2020 to 2021. Have folks looking forward to a few more episodes, and make an early announcement that will remind folks of a couple of times. When we hit our December break, we haven't decided exactly what that is. That break will go at least through May. It could be a little bit longer. I'm not quite sure what that looks like. Primarily, as Terry mentioned, I'm finishing up some some college stuff, and my course load will be even heavier next semester. And I just need that time that I've been devoting to preparing for this to spend some nose book time there so that I make sure that I have enough time to do the rest of my life and work.
We're going to have a long break. That's not to say that there may not come up an occasional pop-up episode if it so hits us, but for the most part, it's going to be a dormant period. And you say till May, let's just be for real, probably till the next August, September, because summer is so hard and we usually take summer off anyway.
Yeah.
And then after that, we're going to reassess that and to see just to see what is effective going forward. We're going to rethink the process. And
this may open the door for our theorized do the lectureship silliness that we talked about doing some in-person,
do the workshop.
Do the workshops. If you happen to be in Florida in the first full week of February, we're happy to sit down and chat with you then.
We should think about potentially doing a do the lunch while we're down there, and just anybody that wants to show up at do the lunch. That's we'll discuss.
That's certainly feasible. You and I both will probably have some. Breakfast is probably easier to schedule.
I don't know,
although
man.
there are some slackers who don't get up. I know. Well, not me.
Yeah. I'm up by 5 o'clock, but some of these guys, they're not there, Like, we'd have to do the breakfast at 6 to be able to
the Lord blessed me with not going first. That's the way that I think about it. Although you did get the curse of the very first lecture.
You mean when I spoke the first time?
Well, aren't you speaking Monday night?
No, I'm Tuesday night.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That would be that's a heavy weight.
Well, here's the thing about Tuesday night. Like, you're right in the middle, and that's the most people. So you're like, there's a lot of anxiety associated with it. I will admit.
Hey, if someone came to me and said, "Do you want to swap topics and times with Terry?" I'd be like, "Absolutely not. That's not me."
Because the combo of both of those things. When I was offered this and told the time and the topic, I was like, "You don't want me to do this?"
Nope. I could do the time with a different topic, or the topic at a different time.
At a different time,
yeah.
I'm an idiot for saying yes. That's what I just realized.
Well, it's one of those things. How can you say no? If
I tried. Jason comes at me and he's like puts me on a guilt trip. And backstory is I told him to never ask me to do this again, and he's like, "But wait, this is why."
And you have a daughter there.
I know. And when she found out, she was like, "Dad, you have to."
Yeah.
So she may not feel that way after I'm done.
These girls are all right. They're all right.
I don't know, man.
All right. Anyway,
we'll see.
we've digressed.
Right.
Hey, again, thanks everybody. We hope you have a great day. And if Terry can help you in any way, I'm certain that he has all kinds of spare time. We'd be happy to do that. And if Terry can't help you, we can find somebody more competent than me.
Chris Emerson can.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Have a great day.